Hey guys, today we're gonna be making a title animation inspired by the Transformers movies. So I've seen some older videos about this subject and I will try to show you some different ways of doing that. So first we were working on a client project and with colleagues we did a second video just for fun. I will link it in the description. As always, I'm gonna add a link to the C4D files. So we're gonna open up Cinema. We're going to be starting by creating a text object. I use the RoboFan font. I'm going to align this on the middle. Then I'm going to select my text and with the Alt key, I'm going to choose an extrusion. This extrusion will be 20 centimeters. So I'm going to choose the fillet cap. For the radius, I'm going to set this to 3. I want to check the constraint. So this way we're going to keep the original shape of the text. And which is also really important is to check the create single object. Then I'm going to select the extrusion. Using Alt, I'm going to make this a child of a Voronoi fracture. So basically this will cut the text in different parts. If I now go to the sources, we're going to have the point generator. We could just change the random seed. But what I'd like to do is having some control over the cuts. I'm going to select the source. I'm going to delete it. I'm going to add in a cube. Then with the fracture selected, I'm going to drag in the cube in the sources. And when I now move my cube around, we're going to have the cuts moving with the cube. So this is pretty interesting. Then I'm just going to create a connect object. Using T, I'm gonna scale this cube down. And then in the fracture, I'm just gonna replace the cube with the new connect object. So now what I can do is just control dragging the cube and using the E shortcut, I'm gonna be able to move my cubes. So this will be pretty convenient because I'm gonna be able to have perfectly straight lines. Just keep in mind that if I select the cube in the viewport, this will select the connect object and not directly the cube. So this is pretty interesting because we're going to have a really nice control on how we're going to split the text. So from here, I'm going to let you cut your text however you want. Depending on the position of two consecutive cubes, we're going to be able to have some 45 degrees angles. So here you can really be creative with that. Okay, so that's the result that I get. So if I just go to the top view now, I can see that the cubes are really on the side of the text. I prefer this to be centered. Here, I'm gonna select the connect and the fracture object. I'm gonna hit Alt G to create a group. I'm gonna call that fracture. And I'm just gonna hide the connect object. So here I'm just gonna select the fracture object and going to the Mograph tab, I'm gonna select a push apart effector. I'm just gonna move the connect and the Voronoi fracture, selecting the fracture now. I'm gonna hit Shift C, reset PSR just to center the null. I'm gonna control drag this null. I'm gonna call this Effectors. So this is just to organize things. I'm just gonna uncheck the push apart effector for now. I would like to add an inner part to the text and I'm gonna animate this slightly differently. We're gonna have this outer part and this will be controlled by the effectors. So here I'm gonna control drag my text. I'm gonna create a new null object and I'm gonna call this inside. So just to see things more clearly, I'm gonna double click in here. I'm gonna add this on the fracture. I'm gonna select the Voronoi fracture. In the object tab, I'm gonna uncheck colorize fragments. I'm gonna set the color to black. I'm gonna uncheck the reflectance and I'm gonna check the transparency. So I'm gonna reduce the brightness on this one. We're gonna see the text, but we're gonna be able to see through. For more convenience, I'm gonna select the first text. I'm gonna right click on the text, then in expressions, set driver. Then I select the second one, and this one will be set driven. So this allows us to change the main text, and we're gonna have the second text that updates. So this text, I'm gonna select it, and I'm gonna be looking for an extrusion. So using Alt, I'm gonna make this a parent. So I would like this text to be slightly inside the main text. I'm gonna select the second text again, and this time I'm gonna create an instance. I'm just gonna hide the fracture for now. So I'm gonna select the instance, and I'm gonna be looking for a sweep. I'm gonna deactivate this. Then I select the sweep again. I'm gonna be looking for a rectangle. This time I use the Shift key to make this a child of the sweep. As I deactivated the text, I can't see my instance anymore. So I'm just going to reactivate that. Then I select the rectangle. Then using T, I'm gonna just scale this down. And we'll be using the sweep just to subtract a small part of the extrude. So I'm gonna select the inside, and I'm gonna add in a boolean. I'm gonna add the extrusion and the sweep as childs of the boolean. In fact, we just want the extrude in the first position. So here we're gonna see the sweep cutting inside the boolean. So I'm gonna select the rectangle, and I'm gonna change its dimensions. I'm gonna leave this to 10 centimeters for now, and I'm gonna increase the height. So here we're gonna be able to erase some part of the text. If I show the fracture again, we have now a nice little inside part for the text. We could have just used a displacer to do that, but the issue is that the displacer is moving the faces along the normals. In some cases, this is not giving us clean results. So I'm just gonna change the height of the rectangle here. Because here, if I deactivate the boolean, we can see that the shapes are crossing. We're gonna have to adjust the width of the rectangle. I'm gonna set this to 1 centimeter. And this will allow us to have this text sitting inside the main text. So I'm gonna use this inside part to generate some smaller debris. So I'm gonna maybe change the extrusion to be only 10 centimeters here. I'm just gonna hit the E key and move that back. I'm gonna hide the fracture again. So I'm gonna select the inside. And this time using Shift, I'm gonna just add in an explosion FX. This will allow us to make an explosion, but we're gonna use this the other way around. We want this to bring back the pieces together. I'm gonna switch to the front view. So here I'm gonna just increase the size of these circles. And right away we're gonna see that we have some gravity going on. I'm gonna set the acceleration to 0. So we're gonna increase the size of these circles. So we're gonna get all the letters. So here we're gonna have some big chunks like that. I'm just gonna deactivate the explosion effects. I'm gonna select the text. I'm gonna set this to be subdivided. And for the angle, I'm gonna set this to 90 degrees. And here I'm gonna be able to really define the maximum length. So here I'm gonna set this to 10 centimeters for now. And this means that we're gonna have more pieces. If I now activate the explosion effects again, we're gonna have some more interesting pieces than what we had before. And now what we could do is adding in a camera. I'm gonna be adding a null object, and this will be the camera pivot. And I'm gonna set the camera to be a child of the null. Once again, Shift C PSR, and I'm gonna reset the position of the camera. So I'm gonna try to place the camera. I'm gonna activate the camera view, and I'm gonna hide the explosion effects, even deactivate the explosion. I'm gonna show the fracture again. I'm gonna select the camera and in the composition tab, I'm gonna activate the grid. I'm gonna increase the cells numbers, and this way we're gonna be able to align things more precisely. So here I'm using the camera pivot to move the camera. I'm moving it up, then using Ctrl D, I'm gonna change the FPS to 25. I want the animation to be 120 frames long. The camera pivot will be used to rotate, and the camera itself will be animated on the Z-axis. So on the camera, I'm gonna add a keyframe on the Z-axis. And for the pivot, I'm gonna animate the H. I'm gonna add a keyframe on the H parameter. I'm gonna go back to frame 0. I'm gonna set this to be 90 degrees. I add a keyframe. And I'm gonna set the Z position for the camera to be 0. We're gonna be starting from the center of the explosion. And as we move away, we're gonna have the letters coming together. Here I'm gonna adjust the curves. So I select the camera. I'm gonna right click on the Z position. I'm gonna go to animation, show F curve. And I would like the curve to be like this. I want this to be custom. I'm gonna unfold and I want to uncheck the auto tangent. And here I'm gonna set this to be 60 frames. On the pivot, I'm gonna do the same. I'm gonna right click, I go to the animation, show F curve. We're gonna lower that. Here I uncheck the auto tangents and I'm gonna set this to be 60 frames. So if I hit play, this is how it looks like. Now that we have a camera move, it's gonna be easier to work on the animation. I'm gonna hide the fracture. I'm gonna activate the explosion. I'm gonna select it. And we're gonna change some of the parameters. I'm gonna decrease the strength. We're gonna add some variation, not too much. So in the direction, we're gonna set the variation to be 100. So the pieces are going all over the place. So for the blast speed, we're gonna add some variation. And for the blast range, we're gonna add some variation too. So here I'm gonna just show the explosion again. And I'm gonna increase my range. So here we're gonna move this in an interesting place. So maybe I'm gonna just center it a little more. I'm gonna increase the strength. So the clusters here are the different parts of the explosion. So if I have one on minimum polygons and maximum polygons, we're gonna have only smaller chunks. And if, for example, I set this to 25, we're gonna have bigger chunks. So I'm gonna set this to 5 for the minimum and 25 for the maximum. So this way we're gonna have small parts and bigger ones. I'm gonna increase slightly the rotation speed, adding some variation. It's always a good idea to add some variation, not too much. In the coordinates, I'm gonna set a keyframe on the p-value. So if I play this back, around frame 60, 70, I'm gonna have this inside part that's in place. I'm gonna set this to 60. So I'm gonna move this explosion on this side, for example. I'm gonna add another keyframe. So this is how it looks for now. I'm gonna hide the explosion. And now if we have a closer look to the letters, we're gonna see some strange behavior like that. So let's select the extrude. I'm gonna check the create single object and I'm gonna do the same for the sweep. And for the boolean, we're gonna check the create single object too. Now we're gonna be able to get rid of most of the artifacts. We're still gonna have some issues over here, for example. It's not that big of an issue. We could just go back to the cluster and here change the thickness. I'm gonna set this to 5, for example. So we still have these weird shapes, but it's not gonna be an issue because it's still inside the main text. I'm just gonna hide the camera so we don't see the grid anymore. So then we're gonna overlay the fracture. So we're gonna unhide this one. I'm gonna go to the perspective view. I'm just gonna activate my push apart effector again. I'm gonna select it. I'm gonna hit Alt G. I'm gonna call this push. So I just set this in null, so it's gonna be easier to animate. I'm gonna select the push apart again. I'm gonna go to the fall off tab, and I'm gonna make a box fall off. So I'm gonna increase its size. As you see inside the box, we're gonna have the effect of the push apart. So I'm gonna increase its size in each direction. So I'm gonna set it on the right side. I'm using the null to move it around. So it's not affecting everything. I'm gonna just increase the size. If you want, we could just go to the effector and increase the radius, which will cause the objects to move apart even more. So I'm gonna animate on the X position, and this is why we set this inside the null. So this way I just have to deal with the X direction and I don't have to change the X and Z values. So back to frame 0, I'm gonna zero out the X value. I'm adding a keyframe. I'm just gonna hide the debris. So the debris are coming together at frame 60. I'm gonna give the push apart some time. And for example, at frame 80, it's gonna be over there. So just to see better, I'm just gonna add some colors. Here we're gonna have the fracture, and this will be the inside. I'm gonna change this to be green. So we have this inside part. I'm gonna play this back. So we're gonna have first the inside part and then the outside that's covering the green part. Maybe I'm gonna move the push in another position, maybe here, and I'm gonna rotate it a little bit. It's gonna look better like this. Maybe I'm gonna change the animation. So I'm gonna invert the fall off. I'm gonna delete the keyframes. I'm gonna add keyframe on the Y. I'm gonna move it. On frame 80, I'm gonna move it in place, add another keyframe. I'm gonna increase the size some more. We could play with the fall off too. So we're gonna have something that's maybe smoother. So looking from the camera, I guess it moved. So I'm gonna set this back to 0. If you have a look from the camera view, everything comes together. So for now, this is a really basic stuff. Here we have a little error, so I'm just gonna move this push a little bit. So to make this a little more interesting, I'm gonna add in a random effector. I'm gonna add this to the effectors of the fracture. And on this one, we're gonna add a box fall off. So I'm gonna move this in place. We want this to be the same size of the object. And this time what we want is we want the fall off to be 0. So this means that outside the box, the randomness will be 0 and inside it's gonna be 100. I'm gonna click invert. This time we're gonna have the randomization happening outside the box. And once they enter the box, they're gonna be snapping in place. So yeah, this is gonna add some complexity to the animation. So for now, this is maybe too snappy. So we could add a Mograph delay. So the delay, I'm gonna add this in the effector now, and I'm gonna add it to the end. I'm trying to keep the same order in my effectors than the order that they have in the fracture. So this way it's easier to follow. And I'm gonna add in a plane. I'm gonna add this to the fracture. I'm gonna call this one plane left. And for this one, we're gonna uncheck the position, and we want it to affect the rotation. We could try something on the H rotation. I'm gonna set this to -90. And if I change the transform space to be on the effector, I'm just gonna deactivate the delay. So if the transform space is on effector, if I turn the effector, I didn't change anything in there. The rotation is gonna be depending on the orientation of the plane. So this time the fall-off will be linear. I'm just gonna make this visible. I'm gonna turn this 90 degrees, and I want the fall-off to be 0.1 on the Z direction. I'm gonna control drag this one. I'm gonna call this plane right. I'm gonna rotate it 180 degrees, and I'm just moving it to the right. Control drag this one. This is the plane top. I'm gonna rotate it. I'm gonna add it to the effector list, and same goes for the right. And this one is gonna be on top. I'm gonna be making a plane front. I'm adding it to the effectors. Still, before the delay, I'm gonna rotate it on this side. So everything that's below this line is going to be rotated. And once they pass the line, they're gonna be aligning to the final position. So that's pretty nice. So this is gonna give us an extra bit of animation without adding any keyframes. So we don't want this to be happening on everything. It's maybe a bit systematic. So we're gonna be adding some Mograph selections. I'm just going to keep the plane left. I select the Voronoi fracture. I'm going to Mograph Selection. So when I select one of these points, it's gonna add a new tag Mograph Selection on the fracture. So if I select the plane left in the Effector tab, I'm adding the selection we just made. I'm gonna call this Mograph Selection left. I'm gonna select my fracture and the Mograph Selection. Then using Shift, I'm gonna just add some elements to this selection. If I switch to wireframe, it's gonna be easier to see. So as I change the name of the selection, I'm gonna have to drag it back to the plane. So I select the fracture and the Mograph Selection. And here, using Shift, I'm gonna add some new elements to the selection. So this rotation is gonna happen only on the selected elements. So this was for the plane left. We're gonna do the same for the plane right. So we're gonna have to deselect the Mograph selection, otherwise we're gonna be replacing it. So we're gonna be working on the right side now. I select the Voronoi fracture. I'm gonna use the Mograph selection again. This one will be Mograph selection right. I'm gonna drag in my selection. To select, we're gonna have to really select the fracture and the Mograph selection. We're gonna make some selection for the top. I go back to the start. I deselect the selection tags, select my fracture, and I start my new selection. So this will be the selection top. So we can have elements that are part of different selections. And this is quite nice because these elements, when they cross this line, they first gonna have the rotation by this line. But if they cross the top line, they're gonna have a second rotation. So this can give us some really nice results. I'm gonna add a plane bottom. So the idea here is really to break up the initial animation. So this is maybe a little more interesting than only with the push apart effector. So we're gonna finish with the front. I'm gonna have to deselect the Mograph selection, and with Shift, I'm gonna add some elements. So I'm gonna activate the delay again. And so here we're gonna see that we have everything coming together in a really nice way. And here we just have the push apart that's animated and the explosion FX. But for the fracture part, we already have only the push apart that's animating everything. So for the push apart, I'm not really sure about the animation. I'm just gonna deactivate the delay once more. I'm gonna show the push apart. Here I really feel that it's going from left to right, and it's maybe not exactly what we want. So instead of doing that, I'm gonna reset the orientation on the push apart. And instead of animating the position of the effector, I'm gonna animate the position of the null. I'm gonna right click on the position and I'm gonna delete this track. I'm gonna set everything back to 0. I'm gonna move the effector like this. I'm gonna animate the null on the y-axis. This way it's gonna be less linear. I'm gonna move it here. Here I'm gonna add in a keyframe. On frame 0, I'm gonna move it up. We have the elements that come together. I'm gonna activate the delay again. We can have something less linear. I guess it's better. So this will be the base effectors. And what I found interesting is having some elements that are slightly offset from the animation. We're gonna use the same kind of technique, but this time we're gonna have a second group of effectors. So I'm gonna start by copying the plane left. This one will be plane position. I'm gonna control drag it to make a copy. This will be rotation. I'm gonna add in a new null. This will be the animated effectors. So in the fracture object, I'm gonna add in the effectors. So for this one, I'm gonna add some effect on the position, like 25 centimeters. Just uncheck the delay for now. And we're gonna make some new selections for those. I'm gonna select my Mograph Selection tool. And in the perspective view, I'm gonna select some of those objects. This one. Okay, I'm gonna select some of them. So this will be our first selection for the animation. And here I'm just gonna simply replace the previous selection on both. Maybe this one is going from left to right, so I'm just gonna rotate it, and I'm just gonna offset the rotation. So first we're gonna have the plane rotation that's going through, and then the position. So I'm gonna select the plane position, and when the objects are in place, I'm gonna move forward. And if I now activate the delay again, we're gonna have the rotation happening first and then the position. So this is what you can see on these two objects. Maybe we want this rotation to be happening sooner, so I'm gonna move this a little more. So I'm gonna adjust the position. So we're gonna really have these two effectors happening one after the other. The rotation and then the position. What we're gonna have to do now is adjusting the timing of those. So I'm gonna select the plane position, and I want this to be happening a little sooner. Let's try this. So here you're gonna have to play around to make something interesting. And then this little effect, you can really easily copy it, and so adding more secondary animation. So we're gonna have the one. This one is gonna be the second. I'm gonna be adding this to the fracture again. This one we want to invert. So instead of going from left to right, we're gonna go from right to left. We're gonna move this on the right side. I'm gonna rotate. I'm gonna add a keyframe. And on this frame, we're gonna move this to the left. And of course, we're gonna be making a new selection for this one. So I want this to be affecting the lower parts of the text. This will be the second animation. So in the effector, I'm just gonna assign the new selection. So this time I'm gonna set this to be -25. I want to change the rotation maybe to be happening on B. So I want the second one to be happening sooner. I'm gonna copy the two first ones. I'm adding them to the fracture again. I'm gonna make a third selection. As we said before, here you can have some elements that are part of different selections. It may be even nicer because you can have some more animation. So this is our third animation. And I'm just gonna assign this to the new planes. On this one, the position will be happening on X. I'm gonna change the keyframes of the animation just to offset things some more. So, okay, this was the animation part. In the next video, we're gonna see how we're gonna add some textures and we're gonna add some lights in Redshift. And then we're gonna switch to After Effects and I'm gonna say a few words about compositing. So thanks for watching and see you in the next video. Bye.